People didn't want this video, but it's the only thing I care about right now, so too bad. When I first heard Scott's comments on the box, I assumed it was a fancy way of saying that there was never any actual idea of what would be in it.
It's the first half of something. It's like a string or a rope just like reaching out. That's how all my games have been made. I feel that there is something there, and I make the roads to get there for that to be revealed. But then sometimes when things do progress, the roads aren't always the same roads as the ones that had been planned before. The progression of the story didn't go there. And so those strings never got pulled on, and those and the other half of that idea remained in the ether, remained in my subconscious.
The simplest way of interpreting this is that the box is the first half of an idea, and the story never progressed in a way that gave Scott an idea for the other half, or specifically, what would be in the box. And I think that's sort of true. I don't think Scott ever decided on a physical item to place inside of the box. It was tempting for me to take a step further and say he had no idea what the purpose of the box was in any capacity, but I just can't. And that's not because I'm clinging to false hope, it's because FNAF World pretty much outright tells us the road that was initially planned. I think a lot of people are familiar with the clock route and its connection to the box, but in case you're not, I'll give a quick run-through. The clock route begins with an entity, seemingly the Fredbear plush, telling the crying child that it will put him back together. Then it instructs us to set up breadcrumbs for the crying child that represent the FNAF 3 hidden minigames. Then when we do this, it tells the crying child, the pieces are in place for you. All you have to do is find them. Then, in a teaser released shortly after FNAF World, there was a hidden message in the metadata reading, "He put the pieces back together." This wording is suspiciously similar to Scott's statement that the box contained the pieces put together. Couple that with a texture for the opened box being found in FNAF World's files, and we've got a pretty open and shut case. The box, in one way or another, represents Happiest Day. That all fits together perfectly. Or it did, until the dreaded Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator came around to punch every existing plot thread in the face. Here's the thing about the FNAF World interpretation of Happiest Day. It needs to happen under very specific circumstances. The pieces are real physical things that are exclusive to Fazbear's Fright. One of them is literally the wall of the building. These pieces can only be put together at that location. But thanks to the missing children's presence in Pizzeria Simulator, that can't have happened. The spirits can't be freed in FNAF 3, only to still be around in a game taking place after it. Because of that, the plot thread of the crying child putting the pieces back together and opening the box cannot possibly work as originally intended. So what then? What becomes of the crying child and the box? Are they tossed aside? The crying child kind of is, but as for the box, not exactly.
He did a video on that box, and he kind of said that he thinks the contents of the box changed over the years. You know, and I bet nobody gave that a whole lot of thought, but I saw that and I was like, he's absolutely right. He's absolutely right. The contents of that box have changed over the years because, you know, it's for that very reason. It's because, you know, of what I was intending the game to be when it happened, and then after the reaction of it, I was like, I need to craft this into something better, and that kind of indirectly does change the contents of the box, you know, because it changes the contents of everything that came before.
There are two clips from the video Scott's talking about that I think are particularly accurate. The first is regarding the way Sister Location course-corrected the story.
Scott knew that the story, as he envisioned it, would be controversial for a fan base that was literally comparing shades of purple across the series. He had a solution to the story that he wanted to tell, but was now trapped by his own success. People were too interested in his mystery box, which is why Sister Location and everything afterward emphasized more real-life events, scoopers and remnant and literal purple people walking around outside.
The thing about FNAF 4 is that unlike the games that came before it, there's no good way to explain it from an in-universe perspective. The crying child's fears manifest as real things later on in the timeline, and his soul is split between 5 animatronics, only one of which he ever had any physical contact with. That's all fine and dandy, if you're willing to overlook the logic of the world that's been set up. It's all heavily symbolic in a way that FNAF fans weren't used to and wouldn't be likely to accept. Or in Scott's own words,
Kind of went a little too broad. It cast this net too wide for interpretation. I guess that's the best way to say it. You know, it went too broad for interpretation, and that left people unsatisfied.
and we saw this confusion and dissatisfaction reach its natural conclusion with the near universally hated Dream Theory. Dream Theory took all the clues hidden throughout the game and interpreted them the way one naturally would if they were looking for a literal explanation, that the first 3 games were fictional narratives inspired by the crying child's fears. It would be incredibly hard to explain that fans were taking it too literally, and even if they did come to the correct understanding, it would still be seen as just diet Dream Theory, as I liked to call it back in the day. That's why everything afterwards follows much more tangible ideas, like the rule that souls possess metal that their body touches when they die. We even see this get applied in Pizzeria Simulator's security puppet minigame, where the puppet ends up cradling Charlotte's corpse, rather than her soul simply finding its way into the puppet on its own. In fact, both Sister Location and Pizzeria Simulator are both built around that particular rule, even going so far as to recontextualize FNAF 4 as William's reason for studying it, which creates a more literal way for FNAF 4 to be what causes everything in the timeline. FNAF 4 leads to Baby, Baby leads to the Missing Children incident, the Missing Children incident leads to Molten Freddy, and Molten Freddy leads to the fire. That's a much more concrete narrative than FNAF 4 just foreshadowing a bunch of loosely connected events to come. That was Scott's way to
ground this again, not necessarily in reality, but I need to ground it in kind of storytelling again.
Now, with all that said, let's look at the other Matt Pat clip I find particularly important.
My first thought about connecting the box to the new game was Candy Cadet. He'll tell you one of 3 separate stories, all sharing the same general theme of 5 objects merging into one object and then being put into a box.
5 children sewn together and put in a coffin. 5 metal keys melted into one in a small room. 5 kittens sewn together and put in a shoebox. Matt Pat had the right idea looking towards these stories, he just came to the wrong conclusion. And that's because at the time, we didn't have the context of the 4th closet to help us understand that the 5 items in these stories aren't the 5 characters in Pizzeria Simulator, but rather the 5 missing children who possessed the classic animatronics and ultimately ended up in Molten Freddy. If the box represents Happiest Day, which features the missing children being brought together, then the current equivalent of this would naturally be Molten Freddy. Henry describes Molten Freddy's creation by saying,
"He brought them all together."
And Molten Freddy himself says, "Together again!" Molten Freddy's design also seems to reference FNAF 3's bad ending, with the glowing yellow right eye. So, by destroying him and releasing the spirits trapped inside, Henry would essentially be bringing about the happiest day, just through a different method than FNAF World suggested. A more literal, tangible, grounded method. I have one more point, but this one is a massive stretch. Molten Freddy's color scheme aligns with the box. Gray, brown, and yellow. This feels like a Gregory equals crying child meme. Of course, if I'm correct about all this, then there was one major casualty, the crying child. In order for the story to be refined into what it's become now, his role had to be sacrificed for William putting the pieces together in an evil way, and Henry putting the pieces together in a good way by freeing them. I mean, you could say that the crying child is also in Molten Freddy, but that would equal 6 children, not 5, which would contradict Candy Cadet. Really, all the crying child does now is play the occasional cameo role. He got a few lines in the logbook, some indirect references in Curse of Dreadbear, and a non-canon kill as Golden Freddy in the week before. As far as we know, he's in Golden Freddy before FNAF 1, he talks a little bit to Cassidy during FNAF 1, and then he kinda just disappears. Or does he? In Ultimate Custom Night, we get a secret jump scare from Fredbear, and then in Curse of Dreadbear, we hear Fredbear's death lines play in multiple levels. There's also a secret message in the game over screen reading, "Where am I?" Also, in Ruin, something makes the Fredbear's Nom Nom Bits arcade machine disappear in the AR world, just like how Monty decorations disappear because Cassie doesn't like him. Does this mean the crying child is still around in the digital world? Probably not, but you never know. Part of me hopes Scott's holding on to the character for a good opportunity, even though you'd think he would have found one somewhere in the 6 games and 70 stories since FNAF World.